Well, joining us now to discuss this is public and constitutional law lecturer at the University of Bristol, Dr. Robert Craig. Robert, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me
on the show today. So, first of all, what does it mean? The fact that this has been repealed, what will it actually look like?
So it's going to go back to the old system. So they've revived the old prerogative of dissolving Parliament, which was effectively a power held by the Prime Minister in reality to choose when to call an election.
Mm-hmm. So that means, realistically speaking then, today, if the Prime Minister stood up and said, we're having an election, there'd be one in 5 or 6 weeks' time.
That's basically the case now. And that's a really good thing, I think, because it's more democratic, in my view, for both of the two limbs within Parliament to have the power to go to the people. Mm-hmm. So the Fixed Term Parliament Act would, in my view, reduce the democratic aspect of the Constitution because only one half, MPs, could bring about a general election. So by restoring the power of the Prime Minister and the government to make a decision, which have their own democratic mandate because they won the election, so that gives two halves of the sort of moving parts within Parliament a chance to press that nuclear button and to call a general election and go to the people.
Do you think the sort of desired benefit of the Act to try and hold the coalition together for that sort of full term is actually also a huge negative in the sense of what we saw over the sort of Brexit negotiations and Brexit votes?
Well, opinions differ on this, but my view is that the trouble we saw in Brexit was in part caused by the Fixed Term Parliament Act, precisely because Theresa May couldn't threaten the backbenchers with a general election, it meant that the political cost of voting against the government on their flagship policy, on the central plank of their entire government, could be voted down without any consequences. And that led to these machinations where you saw backbench MPs basically stepping in and putting forward bills and taking over various procedures of the House of Commons that was created all kinds of trouble, and in my view was in large part, well, it certainly wasn't helped by the Fixed Term Parliament Act, but my view was in fact caused in large part by that.
So whereas in years gone past, Robert, if a government suffered a loss of no confidence vote in the House of Commons, it was a given, wasn't it, that the Prime Minister would have to go to the Queen, who would approve the dissolution of Parliament, there'd be a general election. My understanding, I think the Act was a constitutional outrage. I don't think there was any defence for it at all. My understanding is those circumstances where there'd been a loss of a no confidence vote, there was still 14 days effectively where the Prime Minister or somebody else could try to cobble together another arrangement, perhaps a confidence and supply arrangement or something like that, without explicitly being under any obligation at all to go to the country, even though it had been shown that they couldn't maintain the confidence of the House of Commons. I mean, that's right.
Yeah, well, the Fixed Term Parliament Act was a legal regulation of a political constitution. And that was my central problem with it when I wrote about why I disagreed with it. And you're right, because what they did is they invented this 14-day thing, which never existed before. And that created that as a real sense of uncertainty, because no one knew if the government resigned, whether or not you have, or didn't, or refused to resign, could an opposition government be formed? Could a different coalition be formed? Who would then, it was a very, very complicated situation was created. Whereas the previous system had its faults, but everyone knew how it worked. Yeah, and I think that you mentioned the vote of confidence. Confidence is at the heart of the political constitution. So everyone knows that the government must maintain the confidence of the House of Commons. And that confidence is actually two levels. You've got to maintain the confidence of the House of Commons, but the Prime Minister has now regained the right to try and get the confidence of the people. And that's what was taken away. And it was that two levels of confidence that was removed, and that's less democratic, because you can't go to the country and say, do you support our policy? You have to go through the MPs first. And it created an imbalance between those two elements, the executive within Parliament and the legislature within Parliament, which is being restored. And I think that's a very good thing.